of the land or the various lands on which we are meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So my name's Jo Hopkins. I am the IUCN Commission's Liaison representative, sitting on the Australian Committee for IUCN Board in a non-voting position, and really pleased to be able to be here and talk about this fascinating topic. So I'm very cognizant that we only have an hour, and I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. So without any further ado, I'll just acknowledge that the webinar is being recorded. If you don't want to be part of the recording, just please turn your camera off. A reminder to mute your microphones when not speaking, just to counteract any background noise. And there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so you can either raise your hand, make sure you turn your microphone on and introduce yourself, and to ask a question, or you can use the chat box. So we've got three great speakers today, and I'd like to introduce them and then hand over to them to roll out this fantastic presentation. So welcome Jessica Reid. Jess is a colleague of mine. My day job is at Parks Victoria, and so is Jess's. She's the district manager for Parks Victoria's Northern Rivers region, and was a member of the IUCN Citizens Assembly on Synthetic Biology, as was Stuart Kininmonth. Hi, Stuart. He is part of the Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand, and was also a member of the Citizens Assembly. And of course, welcome Peter Cochrane, IUCN Vice President, and member of the Council and Program and Policy Committee working on Resolution 123. So welcome. Over to you, Jess. Sorry, I've got one more slide. So just quickly, how did Oceania representatives become involved in this Citizens Assembly? And without stealing the thunder, I believe it's one of the first Citizens Assembly to be convened by IUCN. And we're both, as in Parks Victoria and EIANZ, long-term members of IUCN, which is the largest conservation organisation and network in the world. We were randomly selected from over 1,400 IUCN members worldwide, taking into account gender, region, experience, all sorts of things. And it was really great to be able to offer Jess at Parks Victoria this role, considering her most recent involvement in the green listing process for one of her parks, the Woolly Ovens National Park. Stuart and Jess attended two workshops, one in Kenya at the end of last year and one in Thailand at the start of the year, and then will continue their work at the World Conservation Congress in 2025. In the UAE, and the IUCN are fully supporting and funding all 16 members of the Assembly. And I guess this is a really good demonstration of, you get out of your IUCN membership what you put in, and sometimes that the things coming out to organisations are really fascinating and interesting, and what a great professional development opportunity for that Assembly. And that is definitely, I think, my last slide, Jess, so over to you.
Great, thanks, Jo, and welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you my experiences of being part of the Citizens Assembly, but also a little bit about synthetic biology. We've popped in the chat function a link to the IUCN website, which has a number of documents around, I guess, the background information, as well as some of the more current pieces of work that are being done around the policy development. So if you haven't had the opportunity to have a look at those documents, it'll obviously give you a really good understanding of the subject matter and where the IUCN are up to with the policy development, and as well as the Citizens Assembly process. I recommend that you jump in and have a look at those if you've got time. So I'm going to kick off with definitions. So it's fair to say when I first told some people about I was going along or being part of the Citizens Assembly on synthetic biology, there was lots of comments around, well, are you cloning the thylacine, the woolly mammoth? I even had some people make references to zombies. So it was quite an interesting conversation to have. And I must admit, before going into this, process of being part of the Citizens Assembly, I really didn't have a lot of knowledge. I'd heard of the term before, but didn't know what that actually meant and encompassed. So it's fair to say that I wouldn't say I'm a subject matter expert now, but I have very much a deeper understanding of what synthetic biology is. And I guess probably one of the things that's important to note, and was something that was of much discussion as part of our Citizens Assembly process, is that there's not actually a universally identified definition of synthetic biology. So the IUCN has drawn upon the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity's definition, which is a further development and new dimension of modern biotechnology that combines science, tech, and engineering to facilitate and accelerate the understanding, design, redesign, manufacture, and or modification of genetic materials, living organisms, and biological systems. So it's a very much a mouthful, and very much quite a complex thing for most people, particularly outside of the science field, to get a grasp on. And then I guess when we talk about nature conservation, for us in the IUCN, that is the human activity dedicated to averting the loss of nature and advancing its recovery. It's fair to say that synthetic biology is a very polarizing subject, and one worthy of great discussion, both because it has the potential to be a game changer from a positive perspective, but also has significant and many risks to conservation. So I guess if we look at it from a risk perspective, unfortunately, because that's most of the time where we naturally go to, it could impose new risks for nature. So we talk about these risks and opportunity in direct and indirect sense. So some of the direct risks could be that implemented or governed poorly, it could introduce genetic pollution to native species, jeopardizing their persistence. And indirect risks, the use of synthetic biology to open up new agricultural frontiers. It could actually threaten biodiversity processes through land conversion. So an example of this, when we talk about it, I guess more broadly and just touch on it, is around the potential for agricultural crops, say maize, for example, to have a resistance to herbicides, and then that genetic material could be transferred over into wild populations. This was, I guess, an example that we looked at through the Citizens Assembly process. When you flip to the other side, it could open new opportunities for nature conservation. It could offer solutions to current unsolvable threats to biodiversity, such as those caused by invasive alien species and disease. And it could allow for sustainable intensification of agriculture that could reduce pressures on natural ecosystems. And a couple of examples there that are currently, I guess, being tested, and there's very much information out there on the web about these, is G-Bird, the use of genetic drive technology, where they could look to introduce rodents that can have their genetic material changed, which can cause a sex bias characteristic, and therefore the opportunity to decrease the rodent population on certain areas. And then also another example here is around product replacement. So the blue blood that's used in horseshoe crabs at the moment could be synthetically modified or actually synthetically developed. And this could reduce that risk of needing to, I guess, kind of utilize those horseshoe crabs and their blood, which is currently used for bacteria detection in the creation of vaccines and injectable materials. There's just a couple of examples. Now, Stuart, who's obviously also here with us today, has been involved or has much knowledge on potentially some of the benefits and risks for the Great Barrier Reef. Stuart, I was wondering whether you wanted to briefly touch on that at all.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, great summary so far. Yeah, so obviously for many major conservation initiatives, there's been a lot of discussion of what alternatives are possible. And one of the alternatives being discussed within the barrier reef is we have a big problem that many of the corals are not as heat tolerant as climate change will force them to be. So how do you make corals heat tolerant? Now, normally there'd be an evolutionary approach, but the evolutionary approach is very, very slow. So one option being discussed, very unlikely to be implemented for a very, very long time, is to genetically modify the corals such that they would be able to cope with heat in a better way. So this is one example for coral reef ecology. I should say that there is an enormous amount of water to go under the bridge before that becomes possible. But it's an interesting conceptual idea at the moment anyway.
Excellent. Thanks, Stuart. So shaping a coherent and policy on synthetic biology is challenging for a number of reasons. So as you can see here, there's extremely rapid expansion of the technology, and this was a discussion point as part of our Citizens Assembly that we decided that we would like to recommend avoid naming technologies just because that they are changing and evolving, and when we look at a policy, we need to try and future-proof that as much as possible. So technologies now, 2024, very different to 5-10 years just because of the rapid expansion in the area of synthetic biology. Collaboration between countries is essential. And again, this was something that we experienced as part of the Citizens Assembly. There were 16 of us from various different countries, and just the application for us of the Western way of thinking versus some other countries was quite interesting. So I guess you can experience those differences and really highlighted that need for collaboration. Collaboration across levels of governance. So Indigenous peoples and local communities, IPLCs, was a subject that we talked quite a lot about. And there is a need for those multilateral environmental agreements if this policy is going to be effective. The subject is complex and misconceptions are common. And I think we've kind of touched on that already. And I'm sure through your own experiences, various levels of understanding of synthetic biology, you've experienced that as well. And the issue is highly polarising across conservation communities. So there's small portions of conservationists that strongly oppose it or are supportive of it, and there are a lot that are yet undecided and uncertain. And I guess that this is part of this process about, gaining greater knowledge and understanding of the technologies and what needs to be applied in this sense. And that's what this policy will aim to do, is to provide those foundations for better decision making and future proofing and reducing impacts and risks. I guess the other thing I just wanted to touch on, and some of you may have already had the opportunity to jump onto the website, the policy working group has actually drafted or done their first draft of the policy. And I guess one thing that is really important, that the policy that is being developed at the moment around the use of synthetic biology in nature conservation is applied to the purpose of nature conservation. And it both has direct and indirect ecological, social and economic impacts in relation to nature. So I guess this is really important in the sense that we want to identify that in conservation, we'll be looking at the policy will incorporate ecological and social, environmental and cultural aspects. But in other industries, if there's impacts on ecology, yes, it will be in scope. But the IUCN is not looking at their policy in relation to other industries such as agriculture and medicine from a socio-economic or cultural aspect. And I guess probably one other thing to note is that the advances in this technology are very much in the agriculture and medical space at the moment. So it's quite interesting to see how that can then be applied across conservation. So I'm going to hand over to Peter now to give us a bit of a background on how the IUCN got to Resolution 123 and just a bit of context around the policy working group as well. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Jess, and good afternoon. So in 2016, the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii mandated an assessment of synthetic biology and biodiversity conservation. And that was published in 2019 with the title of Genetic Frontiers for Conservation, and it had an accompanying synthesis and key messages for policymakers. From that, our members mandated in September 2021 at the World Conservation Congress in Marseille a process to develop a policy on synthetic biology. it's a long and convoluted resolution in many ways, but it does set out some very key elements that are outlined in a subsequent slide. But it essentially focuses on an inclusive and participatory process. And for the first time in IUCN's history, it set up what we've subsequently called a citizens' assembly, which is try to get the views of a representative sample across the IUCN membership, across the conservation community, of people who are engaged and informed in conservation, but who aren't necessarily or desirably not experts in this particular field. So that was the genesis, in a way, of the Citizens' Assembly. It took the IUCN Council, which was asked to sort of establish this process, quite some time to try to actually narrow this down into something that was workable, and also to raise the funds to make it happen, because like all motions, the money doesn't appear out of IUCN, it has to be sought. So there was a fair bit of fundraising that went on, and I certainly acknowledge the German government and the Moore Foundation for their support for this work, because all the participants are fully funded to undertake this. So on the screen, you've got Resolution 123, which is what we often refer this whole process as. But the next slide, I just want to talk you through briefly. So starting from the left to the right, at the left, the Resolution 123 from September 2021 mandated the President and Council to establish a working group and establish a policy development working group to work out a process to get the members for that, to select them. And that has happened over the last year. The Policy Development Working Group has had its first meeting in February and has put out a draft. As Jess said, that draft is now out for comment. There is a whole sequence of peer reviews and drafting processes. It will be, I think, the third or fourth draft that will finally get to the World Conservation Congress in 2025. So there will be a number of opportunities to input into the policy. But let's go down to the bottom of that slide, the blue arrow down the bottom, which actually also asked Council to establish this inclusive process, which is we've called the Citizens' Assembly. And as Jess said, we sought nominations of 16 members from across our regions, stratified by gender, and also by whether they are members of government or non-government organisations as well. So that took quite some time, but it produced randomly 2 of IUCN members based in Australia, as has been outlined, Parks Victoria and the Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand. And we got Jess and Stuart nominated by those organisations. Jess is going to take you through the process that they had, but essentially the Citizens' Assembly meeting in January was a remarkable exercise, and started on the first day with post-it notes and sort of broad, high-level discussions, and ended up 5 days later producing a very coherent, cohesive final report, actually, which was voted on by the members. That has been fed into the Policy Development Working Group and has informed their approach to the first draft of the policy. So as that slide shows you, there will be a sort of iteration of first draft, second draft, and third drafts, which will go back to Council early next year, or by first quarter next year. And Council will then draft a motion delivering that draft policy to the World Conservation Congress in October next year. I think that's my last slide, Jess.
Yes,
that's the
correct.
Overall process. So I'm going to hand you back for your description of what it was like participating in the Citizens' Assembly.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, we could go into a whole heap of detail on synthetic biology, but really what Stuart and I want to share with you all today is our experience and what we've learned as being part of the Citizens' Assembly. So I think Peter has very much provided good context around what the process was. So it was an inclusive and process where we were randomly selected. So 16 Citizens Assembly members, 8 from government and 8 from civil society organisations from across the world. So we had representatives from Australia, America, Canada, England, Kuwait, Ghana, Japan, Oman, Romania, Finland, Seychelles, South Korea, Argentina, Croatia and Peru. So very much a diverse group of people. And as Peter has said, yeah, we were there as, I guess, kind of the silent majority. Citizens' assemblies are developed when there is usually a polarising or very contentious topic, and it provides the opportunity for the members to bring their own, whether they be organisations or personal views to the process. And must admit, I'd not been involved in a Citizens' Assembly before, but yeah, incredible process, and can highly recommend the opportunity if you get to be involved, but also to consider the use of citizens' assemblies when you're looking at development of policies or anything in the future. So I guess, as Joe mentioned earlier, this is the first time that a citizens' assembly had been used from an IUCN process, and we came from a number of different backgrounds. We had ecologists, geneticists, scientists with modelling skills, policy skills, and from my perspective, I came with an operational land management background. So I have worked for Parks Victoria for 15 years, and I must say that I don't do a lot of what I would say real science much anymore. So this was a great opportunity to dive back into and revisit some of the work I'd done early on in my career around genetics and ecology, and really activate my science brain again, which was excellent. So yeah, I guess before coming in, we really didn't know too much about the Citizens' Assembly process. So I guess that was all a learning curve for us. And we were very fortunate to be supported by the IUCN Secretariat staff, which was led by Dr. Thomas Brooks, the IUCN's chief scientist, and a number of other supporting staff. So not only the opportunity to spend time with Thomas and his amazing knowledge, but I must admit I did enjoy his convening of early morning hunts for rhinos, birds, monkeys and bugs. So he had us all excited about those again, which was a really great process to be involved in. And as Peter has said, along with not only the Citizens' Assembly members, but also the staff, we were supported by the co-chairs of the policy working group, and also by Peter and representatives from the IUCN Council. So we were very much exposed to various levels of the IUCN and the process of resolutions and the work that we've done. These are just a few shots of us. So not only did we spend time in working together and working through the policy recommendations, but we also had the opportunity to socialise and to develop friendships. And I think that that's something that was really, I guess, kind of important, I think, as part of the Citizens' Assembly, to gain and experience and listen to each other and have that respect and understanding. And I guess that was really important in the deliberations process as well, and I think made it a very successful process. So I'm just really mindful of time because I really want to talk about, have the opportunity for questions, but just wanted to give you a really brief overview of what was involved. So the Citizens' Assembly first met from the 20th to the 26th of November 2023 in Nairobi, Kenya, and our visit was hosted by the East and Southern African Regional Office, which is located on the edge of Nairobi National Park. Now, this was a very immersive experience. As you can see, we were right beside the national park. We were visited by baboons and Sykes monkeys on a daily basis, which was probably quite distracting for the consultants that were hosting us, but we did lots of running outside to look at all the amazing wildlife that was present. And really the purpose of this first session was around a training workshop, really, was around bringing all the Citizens' Assembly members up to the same, I guess, kind of knowledge levels. So over the week, we learnt about or revisited fundamentals of genetic engineering, synthetic biology applications. We talked about environmental impacts of synthetic biology. We did a lot of work around environmental risk assessment, biosafety and biosecurity, socioeconomics and ethics of synthetic biology applications, and the IUCN policy development process. So that's just a bit of a snippet of all the different areas that we covered. And then we also had the opportunity not only to develop those relationships together, it was very much about relationship development and I guess kind of working together. We also got the opportunity to head out into the Nairobi National Park as part of the process, which was amazing because we got to see 4 of the 5 iconic African animals. But we also had the opportunity to get stuck out in the national park whilst we were on safari, and which involved us getting out of the vehicle, which is something that you shouldn't do, the sign says. So, yeah, and Stuart, I don't know whether you want to add to this, but went from a fear of lions to actually being covered in ticks. So African ticks, I will take lions any day to those. So it was very much a memorable experience, not only to be learning about synthetic biology, but also to be having that opportunity to head out into the Nairobi National Park as well. Food was another one there, was amazing. IUCN office in Nairobi. They have a chef there and they grow a number of quite a lot of their food on site. So we were very much treated to amazing African food for the whole week that we were there. Bangkok. So the Citizens Assembly reconvened on the 22nd to the 27th of January in Bangkok for the actual deliberation workshop. Now, this couldn't have been polar opposites to the training session. So we knew we were there to do something important, and there was probably a little bit of apprehension because we'd kind of left the training session in Nairobi not really knowing what we had to do, but not really knowing how we were meant to get there. So I think everyone came with a level of anticipation and was really ready to get in and get the job done and develop up our recommendations. So I think as I said before, one of the most valuable things was that opportunity to create those friendships and relationships, and we reconnected really quickly and shared experiences of Christmas and what we'd been up to, but then we got down to the job of actually working through the process. So day 1 was just a bit of a recap of the information that we'd learnt in Nairobi. But then, yeah, as Peter said, post-it notes, it was really a process of trying to extract a whole heap of information out of us and really define and deliberate and work through what were, I guess, the focus areas that the group would work through as part of our recommendations. Now, prior to leaving Nairobi, we went through an exercise where we were to identify our priority focus areas. And as a group, we chose the following 6 areas to be focusing on, and areas where we expanded on recommendations for the policy working group. So these areas were stockpiling resources and knowledge gaps, synthetic biology definitions and policy scope, assessing risks and benefits, Indigenous people and local communities, IPLCs, involvements and rights, awareness raising and trust, and access and benefit sharing. So over the next 4 days of the deliberations workshop, excuse me, we very much refined our thinking and our input around these 6 principles and developed recommendations. And I guess as a part of this group, we started off with random groups where we would provide input. And then towards the end of the week, we were able to select areas or focus areas of interest and really work to refine in these areas. I must admit, come the Wednesday, and Peter and Stuart might like to share some thoughts on this process, we were really kind of going, we have to get this report done, but we haven't really got a lot of report written. And so I think that there was a level of concern there from everyone in the room around, well, this is significant. First time IUCN's used a Citizens Assembly. We have to have this report at the end of the week, but we really haven't gotten anywhere. And I must admit, the process from the Wednesday afternoon to the Friday lunchtime of just evolving and working through and developing up this documentation was one that I'm still in awe of, and I guess kind of really proud of to have been a part of, that we could really get down and get that work done. And I think that that really goes back, if I can reflect on it, to the relationships and the respect that the Citizens Assembly members had with each other, and the opportunity we had to engage outside of not only the training and the deliberation and socialise, and just acknowledging that we all had something to bring of value to bring to this process. And not only that, it really made me appreciate different countries, the way they approach different things, different ways of thinking of different people, people's backgrounds, and the value that you can all bring to a process like this. So yeah, very humbled and honoured to have had the opportunity to be part of the process, and yeah, and to be able to develop up the recommendations and the report, which you can find, as Peter said earlier, on the IUCN website. I never intended to deep dive into any of this, but Stuart, if you wanted to reflect on any of those items there, or anything that you wanted to reflect on in terms of, I guess, the deliberation workshop, that would be great.
Thanks, Jess. There's not really a lot for me to say at this stage. I think you've covered it really well without going into really fine detail, but you can get a quick idea of the broad nature of the task, and that does reflect the broad nature of the group involved.
Excellent, thank you. All right, just coming towards the end now, and again, really keen to have some open dialogue and some questions where we could both share with you a little bit more information on those areas that you would like us to. Is outcomes and where to from here. So the Citizens Assembly's recommendation report has been published and is on the IUCN website. And as we've highlighted throughout the process, the first draft of the policy developed by the Policy Working Group is currently available and open for review and comments as part of the inclusive and participatory process. And yeah, I must admit, in having had the opportunity to look at it now for a week or so, I'm really, yeah, really happy to see, as part of the Citizens Assembly, that yeah, our recommendations and I guess those focus areas that we identified have been highlighted through the process, and it makes me really confident and comfortable that throughout this process that we've been listened to, and our recommendations and our ideas have been considered, and I really think that that's important for the process moving forward. We've got a second and a third review or draft review process before the motion is put to the World Conservation Congress next year, and yeah, I think that that's really important through the process. There'll be a number of briefings and webinars. Obviously, our webinar today is very much about the Citizens Assembly process, but there's broader briefings on the subject matter and the policy development, and information on those can be found through the IUCN website. And yeah, I guess as Citizens Assembly member, we're looking forward to attending the World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi next year, to be able to yeah, see and hear what the IUCN members yeah, have to say about the policy, synthetic biology in relation to nature conservation, and yeah, to see whether that is something that's adopted by the broader IUCN community or not. So in coming to a close, I guess, yeah, again, I just like to reflect and say thank you to all involved, to not only the presenters today, but to Tom Brooks and IUCN Secretariat and Council members. Yeah, life-changing experience, and one that I will never forget. And yeah, one that I'm very proud to be have been part of, and look forward to continuing to connect on the subject and with fellow Citizens Assembly and IUCN members. So just in closing, on a personal note, I just wanted to reflect again on what this experience has given me. So I've had the opportunity to reconnect with the science subject matter and learn about synthetic biology. With Parks Victoria, Joe Hopkins and Ange Gardner do an amazing job of profiling our membership with the IUCN, but I've really been able to take a deep dive into learning more about the IUCN and the benefits of membership. Being able to represent Parks Victoria and Australia at an international level has been one of the most rewarding things, and to be able to share my experiences and my knowledge through those channels and on this subject matter, to be able to connect and learn from some incredible people and share my knowledge and experience, visit new places and see new things, make lifelong friends, and probably most importantly, continue to make a positive contribution to nature conservation, not only in Australia, but worldwide. So that's just a few of my personal reflections of the Citizens Assembly experience. So now I think we're at questions. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other.
That's a good idea. Thanks, Jess. I can see a couple of hands go up, which is great. But there is a question that is in the chat box from Foteme. I hope I've pronounced that right. Apologies if I haven't. They've asked whether the cooperation between IUCN on synthetic biology and the World Intellectual Property Organisation Intergovernmental Committee planning cooperation, I suppose, particularly in regards to intellectual property, genetic resources and traditional knowledge. That's a big question. But was there any discussion, I suppose? Oh, hello. You can turn on your mic and clarify if I've got that wrong.
Thank you so much for providing such an incredible opportunity. Yeah, I just thought it's better to just type my questions. So I would like to know your idea if there is any plan, because of the really interconnections between the goals, I think, both conserving nature. And I have other questions as well, but yeah, I would appreciate firstly this question. Thank you so much.
So I might have a go at that. And to the best of my knowledge, no, not yet. But there is a close relationship with the Convention on Biological Diversity ad hoc technical working group on synthetic biology, which is attempting something similar in a slightly or quite a different way. So I was the liaison point for that for a while, and interestingly enough, some of the members of the CBD ad hoc working group are also on the policy development working group. A number of them are senior, or most of them are actually senior scientists. But it's a great question, and one we will take up with Tom Brooks, the chief scientist, who's our sort of key point of connection to these other bodies. So thank you for that. That's a really great point.
We've got a question. Melissa, you've got your hand up. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Jo, and thanks everyone for the presentations. My name is Melissa Cottrell. I work for the Department of Climate Change and Energy, the Environment and Water, and I am the focal point for Australia for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And because I was a misbehaving child, that's my take on it anyway, I'm the lead negotiator for synthetic biology under the CBD. And I have been on and off for many, many years. So I did like your sort of observations on synthetic biology. They were nice and clear. The scope of this work was very clear to me, which I think is brilliant, because sometimes in the CBD the lines get a bit blurred. So I think that's a really positive for your group and what's coming on. And I actually had a very similar question to Fatima, in the connections of the CBD work. As you know, or you may be aware of, that the upcoming intersessionals for the CBD meeting in Nairobi, which is at UNON, and you don't get to see rhinos out the window. So I'm moving over to IUCN, I think. But we'll be there in Nairobi in next month talking about synthetic biology, and in particular the report that has come out of the MARTEG, or our expert working group under the CBD on things to watch. It seems to be quite a lot more technical in nature. It goes into details about species, gene drives and the applications of those sorts of things. I think that we have actually provided comments to our IUCN partners in the department on this paper in particular. You know, so I think that that the fact that it's related to that nature conservation is really good. You know, and bringing it back to how can we use this, because it's not just positives or negatives. It's actually got both applications, and if we do it carefully, it's not as scary as creating zombies, as some people think. So I guess that's more of an observation, and it's nice to hear, Peter, that you were sort of the liaison point between those two pieces of work, because you know there's a massive amount of duplication of efforts over the international space, and so if we can avoid that, that would be great. But it sounds like it's all coming together, you know, and hopefully the CBD can learn something in terms of setting scope.
Thanks, Melissa. Fatima, you've got another question, please.
Thank you. My next question is concerned with the discourse or movement of the rights of nature. And I'm wondering if there is any consideration or attention to the rights of nature or harmony with nature in this specific part of the policy in IUCN?
So I think the answer to that is that will get elicited in the peer review process that's underway at the moment, because the process so far has had the 16 members of the Citizens Assembly and the 16 members of the Policy Development Working Group have all been experts. Now the draft policy is out right across the full membership of IUCN and the commissions too. So we're reaching out to the sort of 1,500 members of IUCN across the world, and also the 18,000 experts in the IUCN commissions. So we're expecting to get a much wider diversity of views now in many respects, because we've only been able to sample the perspectives of members through the Citizens Assembly. So I think the best time to answer that question will be after this first review period, or probably after the second review period, which will be in a few months' time. The other place that those matters will arise, absolutely, will be in IUCN's regional conservation fora. So each of the IUCN regions is having a regional conservation forum as part of the lead up to the World Conservation Congress next year. The Oceania one is in September this year. We are anticipating that members will be actively discussing the sorts of issues, well, we want members to be actively discussing the issues that they either expect to see or want to bring to the World Conservation Congress. And clearly synthetic biology is one of those. So we're expecting some lively discussions at those regional conservation fora as well. Another aspect of our sort of the inclusive and participatory process that we've embarked upon this year. So I can't say that has, Jess, I don't remember if any of the groups raising, or any of the members of the Citizens Assembly talking about rights of nature in January in Bangkok. I don't think that came up.
Not really, but I think there's probably underpinning tones of it through our discussion, and one thing that we did discuss was around values and principles that sit behind this. So I think it would have come through. I know I experienced it, Stuart, in some of the conversations we were having on the table, but didn't come out explicitly as a principle or a key focus area in its own right.
But having said that, that's an issue that runs right through IUCN. I mean, it's a very live issue, the rights of nature, across all the commissions, and in particular in the World Commission on Environmental Law.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. I'd like to welcome Fleur Downard now. Fleur, the chair of the Australian Committee for IUCN. Got a question?
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Jessica and Stuart. It's really interesting to hear about all the work the Citizens Assembly is doing on synthetic biology, and great to see how you're delivering on that resolution from the last World Conservation Congress, and we'll work on sort of bringing forward a decision for the next World Conservation Congress. So it's fascinating work, and I didn't really know much about how a Citizens Assembly sort of operated as well. So it's really fascinating to hear about that process. I know, so firstly, I'm from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, like Mel Cottrell, and we sort of have prepared some departmental comments to provide to IUCN on that synthetic biology paper, which is great, nice and succinct too, which is fantastic. I've got a sort of question regarding sort of how the work you're doing will also feed into other sort of multilateral work. It's really useful to hear the work that they're doing under the CBD, but are you planning to sort of use the work on maybe defining what synthetic biology is to feed into, say, for instance, the UN Environment Assembly or other sort of multilateral fora as well as the CBD? I wonder if that's something you're sort of considering in the work. That's one question I had, and I did have a second question, but we'll deal with that one first.
Well, let me have a go at that one as well. At the moment, our primary focus is doing the task we're asked to do, which is actually develop a draft policy for members to consider. So, but of course, we are learning from what is happening elsewhere, and a number of our members of the Policy Development Working Group are actually active in the CBD process as well. So, it's a relatively small group of people who are active in this space at that sort of international policy framework space. So those connections are forged, if not deliberatively, perhaps maybe even more incidentally. But I'll come back to my first primary point, which is actually our task is actually to develop a policy for members. But along the way, we're learning what everyone else is doing as well, plus all those interconnecting links between those different processes, which we have some shared people.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And then my second question was sort of going back to that diagram that you had with the 4 boxes explaining what was in and what was out. And I note that if it's sort of an agricultural focus, but has only got sort of economic and social sort of impacts, it's sort of out of scope for your working group. I just wondered if that sort of what's happening in that sort of agricultural space with synthetic biology, is there sort of work sort of being done elsewhere, like under the FAO or other bodies that are involved in synthetic biology, and how you're sort of dovetailing with that work that's being done?
Another great question. IUCN's got a growing relationship with FAO, and its intention is to grow that a lot further because, of course, agriculture is one of the primary causes of biodiversity decline and loss. So that table is there to help us not get sidetracked into sort of medical areas, as Jess mentioned. The vast majority of synthetic biology applications are focused on human health. And our concern, as the title of our process is, the synthetic biology in relation to nature conservation. So if it's an application in agriculture that has an impact on nature, then clearly it's in scope for us. But if it is purely something that is only got an agricultural dimension and no ecological or biodiversity impact, then that would be out of scope. As that table actually says, this is a pretty high level kind of division, and there will be things that sprawl across those areas, and you could imagine that absolutely with cultural dimensions as well. If something is being modified about a traditional food crop, for example, then there would be a social dimension to that, where there might be loss of genetic diversity or function arising out of a changed crop genotype. So it's there as a broad guide, because the policy is not aimed to do everything, but it's a pretty imperfect kind of 4 levels of categories, I've got to say.
So, Peter, I was just going to, you sort of...
I know we've lost Joe, I think.
Yeah, I think we have.
Yeah. I might, if I've got an opportunity, are there any more questions? Because I've got 2 things that are worth probably saying, just about the Citizens Assembly, which I think are really relevant, particularly if this sort of approach has been adopted elsewhere. Apart from having fantastic people nominated to be part of this, who are engaged and deeply engaged with each other, we had superb technical advice and facilitation services provided, which the IUCN procurement process went through and selected, and they were absolutely brilliant. And just to mention the tools that were used as the Miro board and Mentimeter, which there was a little bit of training at the beginning, but they really were extraordinarily effective about making every last neuron of the Citizens' Assembly's members work and be revealed and talked about and shared and discussed and either agreed or not. So those tools were really vital to the success also of the process. And it was a lot of fun sitting on the outside, as I was, watching this go and just see what an efficient process that can be run by professionals.
And if I could add to that, Peter, I think there was some discussion around anonymity as well. And I think, yeah, the opportunity to use Miro and Mentimeter to have a level of anonymity was really good. Like, I think for some participants, you could really be open and honest without fear of judgment or even in terms of, you know, representing your own organisation. We were there as a member of an organisation, but we were also there personally to share views. So I thought that was really useful too, on reflection of your comments there.
I don't know if Joe's back yet. Stuart, I don't know if you've got any reflections on those.
She's just trying to get back in, Peter. Hopefully she won't be a moment.
Okay.
I noticed, Fatima, that you still have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I have another question. I don't know, maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a comment. I'm wondering that with regard to the access and benefit sharing, it's really interesting that you mentioned synthetic biology is going to be only concentrated on conserving nature. But access and benefit sharing, although they have not been focused previously in CBD or WIPO on the just monetary sharing or access, especially with regard to the cooperation with Indigenous people. I'm wondering what kind of conception has access and benefit sharing in this specific field. I think it might be different because with what I know so far, it's really interesting that it has just a limited area just for nature, conserving nature, which has lots of cooperation with local and Indigenous peoples. And I know there are many issues with regard to the Indigenous peoples as well. For example, the right to land, which is the basic requirement for their cooperation. And what is your policy to give them more opportunities to be engaged in this field? Thank you.
Well, Jess, you're a bit of a champion for access and benefit sharing, and constantly reminding us that First Nations have a really important stake in all of this, and their interests and needs and values need to be taken into account. do you want to reflect on that? It resonated right across the Citizens Assembly, but.
Yeah, definitely. And for me personally, I think there's an understanding, I think in the CBD and a few of the participants, of access and benefit sharing, whereas in my experience, we don't refer to it as access and benefit sharing. It's the rights of Indigenous peoples and the respect for land and culture, both tangible and intangible. So yeah, I think it definitely warrants further discussion. And I think it's really important to have that discussion, because we can come from it from a scientific approach of the benefits of sharing that information and intellectual property and the application of that in the science field for the betterment of I guess kind of applications that we know. But I probably say that I've not had these conversations with any IPLCs that I'm involved with, so I just don't know. And I think that's the first place to come from, and it was something that we discussed. I know IUCN has I guess the opportunity to engage with Indigenous peoples, but that was something that we didn't have the opportunity to do as part of the Citizens Assembly. So I think it's about having those conversations and being more open to understanding what IPLCs would like to see in this space as the first point of call. I can't say anything beyond that because I don't know. And I think that that's the most important thing that we need to respect. And again, that is part about it as well. Some of the discussion we had around if we're forging ahead to, say, maybe save a species or work towards an application of gene drive, we've got a predetermined direction, but we need to then make sure that IPLCs are comfortable with that and understanding, say, intangible aspects and impacts of that technology and things like that. We just don't know. So I think that that's most important.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, I'm not sure what happened with my computer, and so my lovely colleague Ange has lent me hers. Just to jump in there, it appears we possibly have a good opportunity to raise the topic of synthetic biology with Indigenous people in Australia, at least at the ACIUCN's Reimagining, well, it actually is being delivered by NAILSMA this year, forum later in the year, where they will be discussing reimagining conservation on country and all different aspects of that. It's the second time the event will take place. That NAILSMA will be, leading the development of the program, and it would be pertinent perhaps to get synthetic biology on that agenda for the traditional owners at that meeting to discuss. So yeah, it's a good opportunity coming up later in the year. Look, we've got 10 seconds to go. I had one. Oh, Melissa, you've got a question. Is it quick?
No, it's really not. I was going to fill you in on how IPLCs are engaged in digital sequence information and SBI and SynBio under the CBD. So I can talk to that, Jess. I'll give you a call, Jess.
Okay, sounds good.
So just to wrap up then, I asked this question to Stuart during our little practice sessions during the week, and I'm really keen to have you, answer it again, Stuart, because my question's bringing it right back down to basics, which is, can you, given what you've experienced as part of the Citizens Assembly, can you see the positives of this technology positively impacting conservation, a conservation issue in Australia in the near future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Joe. It's the thing is that we've become very used to using different technologies. We've used chemicals, for instance, to control weeds. We've used chemicals to control baiting programs for foxes, for example. We've also used viral control for rabbits, calicivirus, and gradually we are working towards the things that humans can do for the environment that we are, generally speaking, mismanaging. And I say mismanaging because we let invasive species come through, and there's lots of issues that we're not managing globally very well. And this is where IUCN is keen to step in, because they see that there is a great need to start to become aware, at least, of the potentials that these types of technologies can present. And so this is where, for instance, in the marine world, we really do have the question about, is it possible to actually come up with some clever genetic engineering program which allows for many marine conservation issues to be satisfied? Right at the moment, the answer is no. We just don't have it at scale. And quite frankly, we're still learning a lot about how genetics relates to environment. But the question is about us understanding it rather than just going ahead and implementing it and seeing what the effect is. You know, like letting a buffel grass weed grow out of control or fire ants go out of control and then seeing it. Here we are actually discussing it before the event, and that's critically important and will play a major role in places like marine conservation and Great Barrier Reef.
I love your practical description and application of it in a sense, you know, with my park management hat on. I love how tangible you make that. So thank you. I feel like this conversation could go on longer, but perhaps if you guys are open to it in the lead up to the World Conservation Congress and post, we can have another discussion on the topic, which I'm sure will evolve quite a lot over the next 12 months. But in the meantime, I would love to thank you, Jess, Stuart and Peter, for coming along and sharing your experiences. It's been a fantastic and fascinating conversation. And thank you to Sarah and Lisa at ACIUCN for doing all the background facilitation. I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.